Hey everyone, before this video begins, I want to warn you that it contains images that some people may find offensive. It looks at the history of the propaganda film, and in it we cover how the Nazi Party used it to gain political power. Understandably, a lot of people may find this offensive. I'm someone who believes in the importance of studying history, but I also want to give you a fair warning before this video begins. So please proceed with caution. How many times have you heard someone say, "It's a movie that changed history"? A lot of the time what they mean is that that movie changed culture. It may have changed social norms, brought on a new fad, or made something relevant. But very infrequently has a movie actually changed history and shaped the world that all of us live in. Probably the most obvious example of film having an impact on the world at large is the propaganda film. Before we go any further, I want to define the propaganda film as a state-funded film with the intention to promote or publicize a particular political cause or point of view. Now, there are three eras of propaganda films, and two defining traits that make up these eras. First, what was happening in the world, and second, what were the capabilities of film and filmmakers at the time. The three eras are pre-World War I and World War I, the interwar period and World War II, and post-World War II and up till today. But in this video, I just want to focus on how it was used in the first two periods. Film lends itself very well to propaganda for a number of reasons. Film, like very few mediums, can capture reality, but that is also a reality that can be manipulated. Filmmakers have almost total control of the finished product. It can be mass-produced and shared, and as I'm sure we all know, can create emotions unrivaled elsewhere. Being an audiovisual medium, a lot of information can be presented in a relatively short period of time, from images, sound, dialogue, and on-screen text. From the birth of cinema, it was used to manipulate audiences. Going back to the late 1890s, Vitagraph Studios created a series of short documentaries with the intention of creating an anti-Spanish sentiment in America during the Spanish-American War. As film became more popular, during World War I, almost every major nation involved with the conflict put some emphasis on creating propaganda films. Oftentimes, these were very brief excerpts from the war to show the strength of their nation. However, the medium was still in its infancy, and its true power wasn't realized until the interwar period. In 1925 in Russia, Sergei Eisenstein was tasked with directing Battleship Potemkin, a historically accurate look into the 1905 mutiny aboard the titular battleship. You could spend hours discussing the impact that this movie had on film as a whole, but equally important is how well this film worked as propaganda. The film's concept is very simple. It shows a revolution and shows the success that can come from Russians working together. In just 80 minutes, the film takes you on an emotional roller coaster, leaving you with a prosperous Russia. The film works phenomenally as a piece of propaganda. Following its release, it was banned in a number of countries for fear of creating a revolution. These countries include Germany, France, the United Kingdom, and even Russia itself once its politics changed a few decades later. Jumping ahead to when World War II broke out, the medium of film had skyrocketed past its preliminary stages in the early 20th century, thanks in part to innovators like Eisenstein and his innovations in editing and storytelling. Leading up to the war, Germany capitalized on the power of moving pictures and released a number of documentaries that showed the potential strength of Germany. These documentaries were aimed at everyday working people, people who already were struggling following World War I and the Treaty of Versailles. Throughout the entire war period, Germany poured a significant amount of its resources into promoting the beliefs of the Nazi Party through film. The majority of these films focused on escapism and the unlimited potential that the Nazi Party could bring to Germany. These films distracted people from the horrors happening around the country with an affirmation that everything will be okay. The United States and other allied countries' response to these propaganda films was to outdo them. They didn't have nearly as big of a budget, but what they did have was a group of great filmmakers working together to use the cinematic language to help change the world. Dozens of great filmmakers worked around the clock to try and combat the propaganda machine that was the Nazi Party. Because of their limited budget, they were forced to be creative, improvising different techniques that could effectively play with emotions, techniques that would be later utilized in their own films. But anti-Nazi films didn't stop at the state level. Charlie Chaplin's The Great Dictator may have been the movie that had the biggest impact on the world. The film is a satirical look into Nazi Germany. Its main objective is to ridicule Adolf Hitler to show the world that he is weak, but still a threat to be taken seriously. The movie looks down on war itself and shows the trouble that can arise from a world at war. Chaplin was the biggest movie star during the silent era, and one of the last remaining silent stars after the medium changed. He was able to bring in an enormous audience, shine a light on the atrocities happening in the Third Reich, and changed the world. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you learned something too. This video was heavily inspired by the documentary 5 Came Back. It's a look into the United States' World War II propaganda machine. I read the book by Mark Harris shortly after watching it, and for the past month or so, I've just been consuming books, articles, and everything I can get my hands on about this topic. I'm going to include some links in the description for you to read a little bit more about this fascinating area of filmmaking. Whenever I have a bit of spare time and want to watch good cinematic storytelling, my go-to has always been different episodes of The Twilight Zone. What has always impressed me about the show is the concept. Every episode is a new story, but they all follow similar patterns, with a setup, conflict, and a resolution. That resolution almost always takes the form of a revelation, or a twist ending with a big reveal. What Rob Sterling, the creator, is able to do so effectively is to set up and reveal information. Within minutes of every episode, we have a pretty good idea of who our protagonist is and what the problem is, and from there watch our protagonist try to solve that problem. Now this entire story arc happens in 22 minutes. The show is able to do this so well because of the universal cinematic language. Basically, we have all seen enough movies throughout our lifetimes, and some things just make sense to us. Take this shot from Casablanca. Even if you have never seen the movie, I guess everyone can tell that we're about to transition to a flashback. This is something that Martin Scorsese spoke about during a speech he gave in 2013.
But, to a large extent, the art of cinema and its development has been linked to us. And we have no choice but to treat all these moving images coming at us as a language.
Today, I want to focus on The Twilight Zone and some of the techniques that the different filmmakers used to make the series so great. With 156 episodes, I won't have enough time to explore each one, so I'd like to single in on a few of the best ones. I'll warn you now, there will be spoilers for these episodes. I want to start off with the very first episode, Where Is Everybody?, and focus on one of the most important elements that is found within almost every episode, creating subjectivity. Essentially, how do you tell a first-person story with a camera? This can be a little bit tricky. In a book, for example, when you boil it down, it all has to do with what pronoun is being used. In film, that doesn't quite correlate. Some films have attempted to be shot from a point of view perspective, but that can look a little bit off. And let's be honest, a 3-minute conversation from one point of view can be pretty boring. The Twilight Zone and most forms of visual storytelling handles this differently. We open up with a wide shot of a man looking around, and then we cut to what he is seeing. And just like that, we are placed in the same position as our protagonist. In addition, as we'll soon learn, this character is confused. He has no idea with what is going on, the same as the audience. We have no idea who he is, but we're interested in his success. As he makes his way around the deserted town, we soon learn it is empty, and as he searches for answers, so are we. Through this, we are in the same position as him. It's the same philosophy that is used in a lot of detective stories. A big part of why we relate to different detectives is that we are on the same quest that they are, trying to solve the crime. The thing is, that isn't exactly true in this episode of The Twilight Zone. As he explores the deserted town, the camera seems to have a mind of its own, dancing around him, always observing him. And that's because, as we learn in the revelation, we are seeing the story unfold through the perspective of onlookers.
Somebody's looking at me, please help me!
Through this, the camera is able to establish the world that we are thrust into, make us care about the protagonist, and set up the revelation all at once. While on the topic of revelations, let's take a look at one of the more well-known episodes, The Eye of the Beholder. We open up with a medium shot of a woman, Maxine, in a hospital bed. Her face is wrapped in bandages. We immediately care for her. She has clearly had a traumatic past, and once we hear how pitiful her existence is,
ever since I can remember, ever since I was a little girl, people have turned away when they looked at me.
we start to feel sympathy. But that sympathy is quickly swallowed up by confusion. It's been minutes and we haven't seen anybody's face. The face is one of the best ways to make people relate to a character. It's why some of the most emotional scenes of all time are almost entirely close-ups. And when you break one of the rules that everybody is familiar with because of the universal cinematic language, it tells the audience that something is wrong. It makes sense why we haven't seen Maxine's face, she's covered in a bandage, but there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to see the doctors' faces. The camera carefully moves around them, so they're always blocked out. The longer it takes before we see anything, the more suspense is built. We know that something is going to happen, and it would be pretty easy to infer what, but we don't know how or why or when. Instead, we just need to wait and watch. In an interview he had with Charlie Rose, Quentin Tarantino talked about suspense, and how the most suspenseful moments come from the longest scenes.
It's like the suspense is a rubber band, and I'm just stretching it and stretching it and stretching and see how far it can stretch. As long as that rubber band can stretch, the longer the scene can hold, the more suspenseful it is.
After 18 minutes of building suspense and anticipation, we have been waiting on a revelation. This episode does almost the exact opposite of what most episodes do. Most reveal a lot to us in the first few minutes.
I had hoped we were in the bedroom of an apartment on West 12th Street in New York City.
However, in this case, it takes the entire episode before we learn anything. When the doctors do reveal her face, that isn't where the suspense stops. It continues to build as she tries to flee. Up to this point, everything has been built up to the revelation, but now we don't know how it will end. Instead, we just need to sit back and watch her run with no idea of what will come next. I'll wrap this video up by looking at one of my favorite episodes, Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge. I'll say that this episode originally started not as an episode, just as a short film. It ended up winning the Short Film Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival and eventually Best Short Film at the Academy Awards. It was first shown to audiences at large when it aired on the Twilight Zone, however. You could argue that this isn't actually an episode, but you can't argue that this isn't a perfect example of great visual storytelling. What it does so well and so seamlessly is change from a narrative to an allegory. If you're not familiar with the story, we follow a man about to be executed after attempting to blow up a bridge during the Civil War. At the last seconds of his life, his rope breaks, he escapes, and he makes his way back home. He sees his wife, and it was all a dream. What this film does so well is blend the line between reality and fantasy, and give you glimpses into the fact that what we are seeing is fake. We hear music that we assume is non-diegetic, intended for the audience.
He moves around.
But it really is his imagination during the last fleeting seconds of his life. The soldiers' voices are also warped, talking and acting in slow motion, a hint that time is not what it seems. Oddities like this continue all the way on his journey home, until he is about to reach his wife, when the journey home seems to last forever. Revealing to us that everything we are seeing is fake. The story is an allegory for the Civil War itself. We see the unnecessary and excessive violence.
Fire!
How it rips families apart and serves no apparent or meaningful purpose. This short film is able to achieve all of this through a mastery of the universal cinematic language. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed. I really love The Twilight Zone. All 5 seasons are available on Netflix if you haven't seen it and want to explore one of the most iconic TV series of all time. Let me know what your favorite episode is. I'm quite fond of Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, and I'm interested in hearing yours.